single biggest thing with parenting right now that I think is a struggle? Dealing with technology. Let's look at some of the things that I thought about when I was making some decisions for my kids. Let's go. Hey, I'm Jennifer, a life coach certified by Tony Robbins, and you've found Consider Jennifer. My passion is to show you the power you have to live the life you deserve by taking the time to consider your life so that you can be on purpose with making it happen. Consider your life, be on purpose. Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Jenny and I am so glad that you are here. This is Consider Jennifer. I appreciate you tuning in. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about dealing with technology when you have children. You know, the battlefield is way different now than it was when I was a kid. I didn't get my first cell phone until I was in high school, and it was legit a bag phone. So the opportunity that is around because of technology for our children is both inspiring and frightening at the same time. And parents today really have to try to figure out how to manage this and make decisions for their kids to use technology in a reasonable and responsible way. And then you add COVID on top of that for the last year now. And it's just, you know what, it's crazy. So today what I wanted to do is I just wanted to share 4 things that we thought about when we were making decisions about our kids and the stuff that affected us. Now I want to be clear, there is no one size fits all for families in terms of what kinds of decisions you make. Everything is unique to your situation, so please don't feel like I'm trying to preach or gospel to anybody. Everything is done on a case-by-case system, and so even if you were to come in and coach with me, there would be no decision about you should do it exactly the way that I'm doing it. These are just some of the things that I thought about. One of the first things that I considered when I was thinking about how to allow my children to use technology was the risk of addiction, tech addiction. Now this is really real, and I never thought about it. It was not my initial thought, but I actually think it's the biggest risk. Even adults get addicted to technology, and there's a huge movement on it right now. The first time I really heard about it was a little talk that Simon Sinek did. There's a link to that video in this description below. You can check it out. And the way it works is actually pretty simple. And in fact, if you've never watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, please go check that out. It also talks about it. But the way it works is on a dopamine hit, which is very much like what happens with a gambling addiction. You know, you get this anticipation from waiting for a like or a comment or a heart or a thumbs up or whatever from a friend or somebody on your picture or comment or post, and that anticipation builds and builds and builds, and then when you get a payoff, which is a random thing, very, very problematic too, you get this huge hit of dopamine. And dopamine is the chemical that's released in your brain that encourages addictive behavior. So this is really real. This is not fake. It's a serious thing. It needs to be taken seriously. I know that for my kids, at one point I remember thinking, gosh, you know, my kid spends so much time sometimes on their device that I'm not sure that they would know how to answer the door and invite somebody into the home, which when I had been their age, I knew how to do that. Or answering a landline, which we don't even have a landline anymore, but answering a landline and saying, hello, how can I help you? Who are you looking for? This is the Meyer house, whatever. And them realizing at some point that my child might not actually have the skills to do that. And one of the problems with technology and this addictive tendency is that kids actually lose some social skills from spending so much time engaging socially on these devices. So that was the very first thing that we thought about and considered when we were making some decisions about what kind of technology and how much time to allow our kids to have access to their devices. The second thing that we considered was an increase in risky behavior. Now, this was the first concern I had when technology became apparent it was going to be a part of my daughter's life. I actually started Facebook. I got a Facebook account because my thought was I was reading about Facebook. It had just gone, it had just been made available to the public. Anybody could get it now. This amazing technology, how you get a hold of it, how it works, all of this stuff. and I was reading in a blog about it, and my first thought was, I'm going to have to get an account, because if I don't know how to use this tech, I can't keep my daughter safe. And my daughter at the time was like 18 months. Like, she hadn't even really held a device yet. So my motivation for even engaging in the technology myself was to protect my child from risks. Now, my first risk was predatory risks. There's a lot of talk about it. It's a real risk, it is, and it should be taken very seriously. But in truth, after doing a lot of the research that I've done, the risks that I'm actually the most concerned about are bullying and not knowing what is appropriate in a public space. Because look, even though it's private, right, it's your phone, it's your device or whatever, once it goes out there, it can be made visible to anybody, and child doesn't know the distinction between some of that information. And so those actually became the risks that I became the most concerned about, and how to keep my children safe in that area and in that space, especially for my son. He's on the spectrum, and he is very much not aware, very unaware of potential risk with sharing information online. And so we have to monitor that very closely to make sure that he's safe in that space, because he just legitimately doesn't know what's okay socially and acceptable and okay to do in that kind of a virtual environment. So those risky behaviors were really important to me. Now, when you combine that with this addiction thing, you've got some of those real negative components with it. And, it leads to increased anxiety and depression, and we've seen that. We've seen kids in the millennial generation come into the workforce, and they don't have the kind of interpersonal relationship skills that generations before them had. Small talk is more difficult for them. I mean, even in communicating with my daughter about, asking your friends, like, information, what's their dad's name, or what's this, like, those are questions that she thinks are weird, which for me, when I was a kid, was very commonplace. So there's a real difference in how kids are communicating because of this stuff, and that increase in risky behavior also means that there's potentially more harm that can be done in an onslaught, particularly with bullying. If you were bullied at home when you were a kid my age, when I was a kid, you got to leave school. You get to go home, and you had several hours in a safe space. The bullying follows you now. It's everywhere. It's wherever your phone is where the bullying could be happening. And that's those things are actually, I think, the biggest risks when our children are engaging in those technologies, is that increased addictive behavior and the increased ability for bullying and improper disclosure of personal information happening online. There's a great metaphor that Simon Sinek does that I think he talks about in the video link that I'm going to provide. So I really suggest you go check it out. It's very interesting. But those were the two big risks that we looked at when we were trying to make some decisions for how to get our kids to use tech. Okay, so we have the risks, these two big risks that I was just talking about. And the third thing that we talked about was actually, it's kind of the reality check. Like, there are benefits to technology, a lot of benefits. Facebook is a tool. Twitter is a tool. Snapchat is a tool. It's like a hammer. If you use it appropriately, it's very helpful. You can build houses and tree houses and chairs and hang pictures in your home. Like, it's a very useful tool. You can also kill people with hammers, so you have to be careful how you use your hammer. It can equally be dangerous. And the same is true for technology. There are risks. There are real risks. But there are also a lot of major benefits. One of those things is global and social awareness, an increase in that. And most studies show that kids today, middle school, high school kids today, have a better understanding of what's happening on a social level globally than they've ever had in the past, because they can so easily find out things and communicate with people on the other side of the world. And there's real value in that. There's real value in that too. The other thing is that it really does provide some social engagement. I have friends that I have made and engaged with solely in a virtual environment. I've never met them before, ever. And we have real relationships. Like, it's real, authentic relationship. Now, it doesn't replace in-person communication. I think anybody who's experienced the last year will agree to that. You can't ignore that. But it is possible to have real engagement with people online. And kids do form communities online of support. I'm thinking specifically of LGBT stuff, anything that is outside of the norm or makes your child feel a little bit separate is a good, it can provide a good space for them to actually get some good social engagement. My son has, because of his autism, has an ability to engage socially with people through tech that might be more difficult for him face to face. So there are some benefits in that way in terms of social engagement. And it is also a communicative device. My stepdaughter's nonverbal. She uses her tablet to speak, and it's taken a long time for her to learn those skills. There are a lot of people on the spectrum and with other various abilities that use their device to communicate, literally communicate. That's a very valuable thing with tech. You have to recognize that. And the other part of this with the reality check for me is I need to be real. Like, sometimes I need a break. You know, when I was a kid, my parents were warned to not let the TV be the babysitter, right? And I think that my parents did a pretty good job with that. And I think that I do a pretty good job of that. But we use technology to occupy our children when we need to. And I feel no shame in that. I mean, they're not on their tablets or their phones constantly. They have downtime. If my son is sitting at dinner and he's having a hard time, we give him his tablet. He's also stressed and it helps him relax sometimes. It gives us a little bit of a break so we can enjoy a meal. And while we have a standing rule to not allow a lot of technology at the table, the truth is my partner and I both work remotely. So if we're on call, we're on call. And it doesn't feel fair to me that I can be on my phone or my partner can be on his phone and my daughter can't be. We allow some flexibility in that depending on the time and the circumstances and the situation. Sometimes it's fun to sit at a table with friends and share photos and show videos of things that you've done over the last week. There is value in that. And so we don't have hard and fast rules about all of those things. We use a little bit of common sense and some perspective in being reasonable with how we engage with that technology on a regular basis. Okay, so the last thing that we thought about when we were thinking about how to let our kids engage in technology was this idea of responsibility and independence. You know, I believe that the purpose of having children is to raise adults, not to keep kids kids. And if you're going to raise adults, then they need to learn. You have to teach them how to be an adult. When your child is growing, they get more responsibility to do things. At some point, they can leave the house by themselves. They can stay home by themselves. They can watch other people's children. They're babysitting now. They learn to drive. They get a job. They have their first checking account. We have got to make sure that we're also teaching our children how to use social media appropriately. And that means they have to have access to a certain amount of social media as they continue to grow. From my perspective, because you can't learn how to use it if you're not allowed to ever touch it. We have thought about what is a reasonable stepwise process of having more independence and more responsibility with your own technology as you continue to age. What's appropriate for my 10-year-old is not going to be appropriate for my 16-year-old, and what's appropriate for my 13-year-old with autism is not going to be appropriate necessarily with my 16-year-old with autism. Like, it's all different and it's based on the kid. So these aren't, again, hard and fast rules. I'm not about one size fits all. But I do think that it needs to be taken in consideration. You need to think about how do you want to teach your kids how to be appropriate in this environment, in this virtual space. You know, we can't tell our kids that they can never touch something and then at 18 hand them a device and say, okay, go figure it out. That is a huge recipe for disaster. They need some experience and some practice in safe ways so that they can learn what kind of information to appropriately disclose and how to stay safe online and know how to manage their time so they're not addicted to their devices. Those are important skills, and the only way we can teach our kids those skills is if they actually have access to some of the tech and we give them a little bit of rope. And you know what? When they trip and fall, we help pick them up, we dust them off, we recorrect and direct, and then we move on. And that's how you deal with those things, I think, in the best possible way. Cutting it off or overly monitoring, I think, is kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Ultimately, it's going to be not helpful for you or for your kid. So those are the 4 things that we talked about and took into consideration when we were making some rules and some guidelines on how we wanted the kids to be able to engage online. And they've shifted a little bit depending on our child, depending on the needs, depending on COVID. You know, we've needed to manage those things a little bit differently as our experience has changed and our children have grown. So, but those are the 4 things that I think are really important. I hope that was informative for you. I hope it was interesting. I think it's an important topic, especially right now with the school situation for a lot of people, and a lot of us are still having to stay at home. So there's a lot of tech use right now. And, you know, hopefully it alleviates some fears and concerns. I don't think it's something that we have to be terrified of, aware of, proactive about, but not anxiety-ridden and terrified of. And, you know, it's a great way to open dialogue with your kids and have honest and frank, transparent conversations with them about, you know, hard topics, drugs, sex, pornography, all kinds of things, right? And making sure that they're learning about those things in an appropriate and safe way so that they don't hurt themselves when they're free from the nest and doing whatever it is that they're going to be doing. So that's my piece on that. Thank you guys for tuning in. Come back next week. We'll have another video. Be sure to like and share and subscribe if you found this interesting. Don't forget to check out my blog, Consider Jennifer. You can get exclusive information in that space. And as always, if you're interested in working some problems out that you're having in your own, or you're having some issues with your stuff at the house, give me a call. We'll set up an appointment. We'll talk about it. That's what I do. So I hope that you guys have a great evening. And every day, don't forget, be on purpose. Bye.